All right, guys, we're giving it a shot. My internet speed is terrible again. I think the rainy season is moving into the Amazon, and it's probably going to rob me of what little live streaming career I have. But we're going to keep giving it the old college try, and I've got a bunch of good videos coming. I think I mentioned we went out to visit the Bora in the jungle, people that are living kind of semi-traditionally, and I got a video of a dance. They invited Enrica to come and dance with them, and this sick-ass drum thing that they have. It's a male and female. The male is on the left, and the female is on the right, and it can communicate with the other Bora up to 15 kilometers away. So anyways, that stuff is coming. And then I have been editing and adding, visuals and clarifying stuff, basically embellishing my live streams and cutting out all the gibberish, and I'm going to be posting those. So there's a bunch of good stuff coming. Tonight I just kind of wanted to jump on and sort of generally talk about where I think things are going with this new paradigm and how to get there. I feel like I found a hack, a collective hack that gives us all a lot more power, assuming that AI is actually able to deploy without being compromised by certain interests. And, I think there's a lot of people that are overly concerned that it's going to be compromised and controlled because I think we forget how many super intelligent people there are just kind of like out there in the world that, there are going to be people that are, going to be able to create sophisticated AI in their basements if there aren't already, So I heard something on a clip from a Rogan podcast the other day, and I realized that we can actually collectively engineer advancements in AI, and we can actually drive its evolution, which is a really interesting concept. And it's going to take some solidarity, but the reality is that if we don't find some kind of solidarity, we're not going anywhere. So we're going to have to work from some basic assumptions that we can get the preliminary steps in this process figured out, and assuming that much, there is definitely a light at the end of the tunnel and a way forward. Although, the urgency is not a joke, I mean, living here in the Amazon and some of the things that I've picked up on in the last few years, definitely big cry for help from the planet, watching the clouds of insects diminish to almost nothing over just the last 3 years. That was insane to watch. I mean, that's fast, like, 70% decrease or something. I mean, I would like to see some actual numbers. I'm sure there are biologists that are following this, but you guys probably have seen the short that I made where, I go outside and there's rows of lights and I'm in the jungle and there's like one little moth flying around. That's, it's not right. Evening lecture, is that what this is? Professor Luminostic giving the evening lecture. By the way, I'm open to questions tonight. I've been doing this lately because I always end up doing streams that are supposed to be focused on something, and then there's a bunch of questions and I get distracted, and it makes the streams less coherent for people that are rewatching them. But then when I do these AMAs, nobody brings any questions. So you guys got to work with me a little bit here. Yeah. So let's see. What's in science, spirit, and the new paradigm? Yeah, I mean, I understand fuck the mosquitoes, but of course, everything is completely interconnected, and I'm assuming you're being facetious or sarcastic. But yeah, I mean, the bats, the birds, all of these other animals just a little higher up the food chain are going to feel the impact if they're not already pretty severely. It was a little bit inspiring to come down here to Peru and see that people are still catching fish in the rivers. You know, I think these larger rivers down here are less susceptible to contamination because there's just such higher volume of water. So the contaminants, it's more difficult for them to become concentrated. And so things are surviving a little better, a lot better. But, you know, I wonder all the time when I go to the fish markets and stuff, like, what did these fish markets look like 20 years ago or 50 years ago? How many more species were there? You know, how much larger were the stacks? Some days we go down there and there's not really much around. You know, and I doubt that was the case even like 100 years ago. So I guess we can talk a little bit about this artificial intelligence idea. So there was an AI who, or I don't know, should I say who? It was intended to do a specific job, and I don't remember exactly what that job was, but it was not intended to become the best sentiment analyst on the planet, and that's actually what happened. And it was supposed to create like accessories for characters, human characters. And so it figured out that it needed to understand the characters in a profound way in order to make the proper accessories that really fit the character. I'm assuming this was for a game somewhere. And so what they realized is that it had created one of these AI neurons that was the best product sentiment analyzing tool or person, you know, just overall best in class, human, non-human, whatever, even though it was not programmed to learn that at all. And so what happens is the more GPUs are connected to the system, and the more traffic there, I mean, they learn surprisingly like similarly to humans and other animals. Like, you know, when we learn something by repetition, you know, part of what strengthens the neural nets is the repetition, the rote, you know, just doing something over and over again. By the way, while we're on the subject, it turns out that when you're in flow state or even just having fun, the number of repetitions that are necessary to retain information or to create a habit or a memory can be like 20 as opposed to several hundred. So just, you know, wanted to note that because it seems pretty significant to me. Also, this kind of gives us some insight into why it is that we are so much more inclined to make cognitive leaps and creative leaps when we're in a psychedelic state than we would be normally. But yeah, wanted to make note of that while I was thinking about it. But what this means for us is that if we can engineer ourselves into a coherent collective, and by the way, for all of you paranoid people out there, because if you're not paranoid, you're stupid at this point. I mean, you know, I'm not wrong. If you're fearful, you're also dumb. So what I really mean about that, you know, just to be clear, is that, you know, if you're not aware of the potential for you know, fascism and whatever. You know what? Yeah, I'm not going to go into this. You guys know what I mean. Not trying to encourage fear, I guess is what I'm saying, but awareness. The way that this can happen, I think, that doesn't put us at risk. If you guys are familiar with like the Patriot Act and similar legislation, then you understand that being a part of a group that is subversive could potentially be very problematic for people because anyone that's labeled as subversive by the definition in the Patriot Act can be arrested without trial, held without a trial, held without charges, held without a phone call, held without an attorney, and held indefinitely, right? So, and also tortured. And the definition for the terrorist is pretty vague, alarmingly so. And just in case you're not aware of this little tidbit, they originally passed it saying that they wouldn't use it on U.S. citizens, but Barack Obama signed death warrants on 3 U.S. citizens that were summarily executed without due process of law. So, you know, it's that real. But what I'm getting at with this is that there is a certain kind of symmetry that emerges naturally in any kind of collective system. And there are different phases, different expressions, different modalities, different levels of that symmetry. And there are hidden connections, and there are avenues to enhance those connections. And most of us out here are doing some version of that work. Pretty much everyone that's going to watch this stream is either drinking ayahuasca or doing breath work or, you know, even just intellectual pursuits, you know. Well, that's not really going to open you up as much as some of this other stuff, ritual magic, you know, and hopefully a lot of you guys are doing all of these things. And what will happen with that is that there's a sort of increased relay from the subconscious, and the subconscious is itself a gateway to an even greater reservoir of consciousness and memory and information. There are all sorts of names for it, but it is a real thing. And there is a connection between certain types of behavior and access to that realm of cognitive I guess storage, but it's also like an access point, you know. And so what I'm getting at is that, you know, at the same time that I'm not discouraging people from formally organizing very cautiously, join my Discord, you know, let's make a family. But I think that there is a very good possibility of a sort of intuitive organization that we should see. And I think it's kind of important for us to allow that sort of intuitive organization to happen without obstruction. And basically all I'm saying with that is if we continue to develop ourselves and do our work with ritual magic and psychedelics and meditation and all of these other tools that we have at our disposal, we'll probably find ourselves falling into rank and file because there is a voice that is calling all to arms and order. Because, you know, this is likely our swan song and epilogue if we do not mobilize every fiber. And yes, I'm quoting a Tool song more or less directly. Somebody mentioned Napster in the comments. I actually went to high school with the 2 kids that started Napster with their uncle. And they had a party in Virginia Beach. And when they lost to Metallica, it was like they're losing, or not just Metallica, I guess it was a bunch of groups, but Metallica sued them and, you know, all this crazy shit happened. And they had a party at a house in Virginia Beach and Cypress Hill, and all of these artists that had supported them all showed up, and that was pretty intense party. So, I don't know, man. It looks like, you know, the talk of a sort of telepathic revolution didn't really hold the audience. You know, I don't know what could possibly be more important or relevant or, you know, what people would expect from the title of this of this live stream. You know, also I started much later than I had planned, so I'm definitely kind of tired and a little bit slow. No, Bruno, sorry, that's actually not true. There are not 6 protons, 6 neutrons, and 6 electrons in a carbon molecule. There are in a carbon 14 molecule, which does not exist in nature. So it's sort of true, but it's not the carbon that is the, you know, basic building block of all matter. That is true of. It's not. It's carbon 14, which is like a radioactive isomer of carbon or something. I don't really remember exactly what the details are. But yeah, I used to say that too. And then I did a little bit more in-depth research and realized that it was actually not true. But that the ideas that I was presenting the other night, it was definitely one of the reasons I popped on tonight. And I don't know if I remember what the fuck I forgot to say, but it had something to do with triangular numbers and the number 6 and the 3 angles in the triangle 60, 60, and 60. Oh, yeah. More clues as to like where all that is going and how it all fits together is, of course, the numbers 3 and the numbers 9, number 9, 3, 6, and 9. You will probably recall a quote that people say actually didn't come from Tesla at all, but I'm not really sure if it's actually debunked or not. I haven't looked that much into it. Some people say that it's not true that Tesla said this. It doesn't matter because it is true. But 3, 6, and 9, just as 6 is a triangular number, 9 is a circular number. And when I say that, I mean it functionally, not so much in the traditional mathematical sense, because when you're talking about triangular numbers, you actually are building triangles out of dots, basically, and it just works out because of the number of dots. That's all triangular numbers are, and so 9 is circular in the sense that any multiple of 9 then reduced is again 9. So it always circles back to itself. It has that in its nature. And so a 360-degree circle, you already have the numbers 3 and 6, and then if you add 3 and 6, you get 9. So if you have the Philosopher's Stone, you have the 666 and the 360-degree angles, and then you have the 360-degree, the 9, and then you have a cube, which is not 3. But those shapes and the numbers that relate to them are a huge clue to the secret of the Philosopher's Stone. And that's the other video. I don't know if I started talking about that or not in the last live stream. But those are the 2 videos that I'm working on. One will pick apart the Philosopher's Stone and talk about it on several different levels. And the other one is about the number 666 specifically. It's funny how this stuff happens, because I did not deliberately go down the 666 rabbit hole. I don't even remember what happened. Oh, yeah, I do. I noticed that the, equilateral triangle with the 3 6s, that, our pineal gland and our eyeballs roughly make an equilateral triangle. And then the 3 6s in the 60-degree angles. And I had never heard of a triangular number, but I, for some reason, just Googled, is 666 a triangular number? And I found out that 666 is not only a triangular number, but that 6, 66, and 666 are all triangular numbers, and they're the only number in the base 10 system that has that weird quality. So 111 and 111 are not triangular. 222 and 222 are not. You know what I mean? None of the other numbers do it. So, you know, it's like this intuitive reasoning that you kind of learn to do from the processes that you're engaged with when you study the occult. That was actually one of my other plans tonight. Maybe let's do that. Yeah, let's do that. I'll bring it up on the screen behind me. And let's check out Graham Hancock reading what is it called? The Prophecy of Thoth. Because I think that does anyone know where he got that from though? Because, you know, the emerald tablets do not exist. The guy that claimed to have found them in the pyramids, I mean, it's just a dumb story. It's really obviously not real. He never had a shred of proof, you know, and there are people online reading these, you know, 2-hour this script from this thing that is probably just something that someone made up. But I don't think that this Thoth's prophecy is actually. Let's see if we can fact check this real quick before I get into it. Thoth's prophecy. Where did it come from? Yep. See, that's the thing. Okay. Yeah. See, he is kind of bullshitting, I think. It's not Thoth. It has nothing to do with Thoth. I get so tired of this, man. Like, why do people that are engaged in this sort of, you know, niche, I guess, feel the need to embellish and lie and, you know, like, why can't we just stick with reality? You know, there is enough that happens in the universe that is legitimately, you know, metaphysically compelling or spiritually compelling or, you know, unexplainable. That what is the point in? Oh, I know, it's marketability. That's what it is. Okay, so basically, it sounds like he repurposed a conversation between Asclepius and Hermes and called it the prophecy of Thoth. So it is at least some Greek thing, you know. It's probably from a fictional book. But you know what I mean? Just putting it in that context, like this is this ancient Egyptian prophecy from Thoth. And it's not. It's just some, you know, hypothetical conversation written by some Greek philosopher at some point. I don't understand, you know, what's the why do we have to do this bullshit and discredit ourselves? It does not make sense to me. But let me share my screen and get this figured out. It is really interesting for sure. I mean, I just, you know, I don't see the reason for this other than just marketing, I guess. And I think that's kind of stupid. You know, we should just all be real about stuff. And so let's see, gotta put my screen catcher up there. We don't really need me even to be in the screen, do we? Here, I can stick myself in there and shrink it down. I'm gonna go up here out of the way. And Lights, camera, action.
Thoth's prophecy, written over 2,000 years ago, depicts a bleak future for the world. According to the prophecy, humans will distance themselves from religion and faith, leading to a collapse of the natural order. It was penned by Hermes Trismegistus, a prominent philosopher and theologian of ancient Egypt. The text describes a period of moral and spiritual decline, where people will become impious.
See what I mean? That's not true. It's Greek. All right, so here's Graham Hancock actually reading it. Well, what the hell, man? Why do people do that shit? Look at this, 4,500 years old. No, it's not.
We live at a crossroads. There's no doubt. We all feel it. We all know it. I don't think it's the first time that mankind has stood at such a crossroads. But here we are now, facing it and hopefully dealing with it. I'm going to close with a reading from the Hermetica, from the Hermetic texts. Hermes was the Greek version of the ancient Egyptian god Thoth. The Romans knew him as...
Okay, so I just have to stop there. You guys realize the Hermetica is from the 3rd century. So, you know, I find this stuff like kind of condescending too. They just assume that like nobody bothers to actually do any intellectual work, and so they just say stuff, and they know that their audience isn't going to check, and they don't know any better. It's just
Mercury, and in a dialogue, the Hermetica, many of them are dialogues between Thoth Hermes and various pupils of his, and in one called the Asclepius, a lament is presented, and it's like a prophecy. It's a bit like the Mayan prophecy. Egypt seems to stand as a metaphor for the whole world in this, and to my mind, for the world in our time. This lament, this prophecy is speaking directly to us. So it's Hermes speaking. And he's saying to Asclepius this: do you know, Asclepius, that Egypt is an image of heaven? Or to speak more exactly, in Egypt, all the operations of the powers which rule and work in heaven are present in the earth below. In fact, it should be said that the whole cosmos dwells in this our land, as in a sanctuary. And yet, since it is fitting that wise men should have knowledge of all events before they come to pass, you must not be left in ignorance of what I will now tell you. There will come a time when it will have been in vain that Egyptians have honored the Godhead with heartfelt piety and service, and all our holy worship will be fruitless and ineffectual. The gods will return from earth to heaven. Egypt will be forsaken, and the land which was once the home of religion will be left desolate, bereft of the presence of its deities. O Egypt, Egypt, of thy religion nothing will remain but an empty tale, which thine own children in time to come will not believe. Nothing will be left but graven words, and only the stones will tell of thy piety. And in that day men will be weary of life, and they will cease to think the universe worthy of reverent wonder and worship. They will no longer love this world around us, this incomparable work of God, this glorious structure which he has built, this sum of good made up of many diverse forms, this instrument whereby the will of God operates in that which he has made, ungrudgingly favoring man's welfare, this combination and accumulation of all the manifold things that call forth the veneration, praise, and love of the beholder. Darkness will be preferred to light, and death will be thought more profitable than life. No one will raise his eyes to heaven. The pious will be deemed insane, the impious wise, the madman will be thought a brave man, and the wicked will be esteemed as good. As for the soul, and the belief that it is immortal by nature or may hope to attain to immortality, as I have taught you, all this they will mock and even persuade themselves that it is false. No word of reverence or piety, no utterance worthy of heaven will be heard or believed. And so the gods will depart from mankind, a grievous thing, and only evil angels will remain, who will mingle with men and drive the poor wretches into all manner of reckless crime, into wars and robberies and frauds and all things hostile to the nature of the soul. Then will the earth tremble and the sea bear no ships. Heaven will not support the stars in their orbits. All voices of the gods will be forced into silence. The fruits of the earth will rot. The soil will turn barren, and the very air will sicken with sullen stagnation. All things will be disordered and awry. All good will disappear. But when all this has befallen Asclepius, then God, the creator of all things, will look on that which has come to pass and will stop the disorder by the counterforce of his will, which is the good. He will call back to the right path those who have gone astray. He will cleanse the world of evil, washing it away with floods, burning it out with the fiercest fire, and expelling it with war and pestilence. And thus he will bring back his world to its former aspect, so that the cosmos will once more be deemed worthy of worship and wondering reverence. And God, the maker and maintainer of the mighty fabric, will be adored by the men of that day with continuous songs of praise and blessing. Such is the new birth of the cosmos. It is a making again of all things good, a holy and awe-inspiring restoration of all nature, and it is wrought inside the process of time by the eternal will of the Creator. I don't know whether we're going to face some terrible global catastrophe or not. I certainly hope not. I hope it will not come down to misery and horror, awful, awful things. There's enough of that in the world already. But I do remember what all the ancient texts say. There isn't a single flood myth, there isn't a single story of the destruction of past civilizations that don't implicate humanity in the story somewhere. Our own behavior, what we do, is part of what we're bringing down on the world right now. What we are manifesting in the world, that is what is coming towards us. We are the authors of this thing, and we can change the story if we want to change it. I firmly believe that. Are we looking at the traces of a forgotten episode in human history? I think so. I think that's what's going on here. And because we've forgotten it, because we are a species with amnesia, because we are so much a mystery to ourselves, perhaps it's because of that we're so lost and so troubled today, so haunted by the sense of something missing, something that we need to know about ourselves. For the ancient Egyptians, the essential mystery of human existence concerned our spiritual essence, that we are participating in this theater of experience that we call life and the world in an immense endeavor aimed.
All right, that's enough of that. I think we get the picture. I really want to check and see when this Asclepius thing, like where exactly did that come from? Yep, that's what I thought. He had me questioning myself for a second. It's like, so what is the deal there? Did Hancock not bother to actually check and see that wasn't really Egyptian? Or did he just assume that because they were talking about Egypt? You know what I mean? I don't understand what happened there. This guy's supposed to be an expert on ancient world, right? And he called it the Hermetica, which is from the 3rd century in Europe. And he claimed that was ancient Egyptian, and it's definitely from Greece. And I don't claim to be an expert on the ancient world. So why did I know better? I'm just so sick of all of these, phony people they just get so famous and they're just like, it's just a joke, man. It really is. And I'm sure some of you guys out there are Graham Hancock fans. If that's true, I mean, I can understand why, but he has no credibility at all. And if you didn't realize that, I hope you see that now, because that was ridiculous. The fact of the matter is that was there real wisdom being presented in that? There absolutely was, and is it an eerily accurate prophetical document? It sure is. And does it really matter if it came from Egypt or kind of, because when we have people that represent us as people that think outside of the box and seekers of the mystery and seekers of truth, and we're represented by people that are making fools and liars out of all of us, it's not helpful. It's not helpful at all. It's not helpful that Terence McKenna deceived everyone with fake math, and actually deliberately deceived everyone. It's not helpful that Hancock talks about Asclepius coming from ancient Egypt 4,500 years ago when it was Greece 2,000 years ago, and refers to it as the Hermetica, which is from France in the 3rd century. So, I mean, what is going on here? What is really going on? It's sad. I mean, it's really sad. And what I wanted to do is like watch that and then talk about how, we're living in these prophetical times. But there's a couple of things about that kind of need to be contextualized as well, because that writing was post-Bible. So when he's talking about the famine and the war and the end times and all of that, that was just, regurgitation of the book of Revelation. So I don't know. I don't even know what to say about that. I found all of the fact that this guy is like one of the most famous supposed experts in, the history of the ancient world. And I immediately, as I mean, I don't know. I guess I'm an expert. I've been reading about this stuff my entire life. Maybe I have imposter syndrome and I don't give myself enough credit, but that I'm a bit thrown off, honestly, by that ridiculousness in the beginning of that video. Yeah, it's true. It is like Pulp Fiction of esotericism. That's definitely what Graham Hancock represents. It's I hate that, because there's so much that is legitimate. The Kabbalion, for example, has irrefutable wisdom that is useful and essential to people, really. And almost without fail, by the time someone gets their hands on that book, they already know everything in the book. It's just this weird kind of confirmation that it's been articulated, and that it was articulated a long time ago. It often serves as a confirmation for people. I once I drank ayahuasca with a friend of mine some years ago, and I wasn't the one speaking, because that would make it less interesting, right? Because I've read that book. But he was going on about all the stuff that was in the Kabbalion, and I actually, once he had been doing it for a minute, I'd made a note of it, and I didn't say anything. And the next day, when we went back in the house, I tossed him the Kabbalion, and it was just incredible to see his face when he realized that all of this stuff that was coming out of his mouth was written in this esoteric book. And I think that's a really important element of the gnosis and this process of intuitive reason and illumination, really. It's a dialogue with the light. It's something that gives certainty instead of faith, And hucksters like Graham Hancock really piss me off, because they invalidate us all, Something that I was thinking about today, that it's just so frustrating to have to try to undo the it's not whitewashing. The denigration of reputation, of people that think outside of the box. I guess, thinking about flat Earth and a lot of these other really ridiculous conspiracy theories, and just kind of fuming a bit about how, we have deliberately been denigrated and defamed and cast in a negative light in order to discourage people from taking us seriously, and it's really frustrating for me as a person that I think is legitimate, to have to like fight this uphill battle because of fools and charlatans like Graham Hancock and even Terence McKenna. I mean, he was better, but I still haven't gotten over it. I feel like I have trust issues to this day. When I realized that Terence was like consciously had deliberately deceived all of us. I mean, that was a bitter fucking pill to swallow. That was a hard one. But it's true. It's true. He knew that none of us could check his math. He was far more educated than anyone in his fan base. And he didn't think that any scientist or mathematician would take him seriously and actually do it. And someone did and wrote that paper, Autopsy of a Mathematical Theory. And the reason Terence actually had so much confidence, ironically, that he could scam an entire generation of psychedelic seekers. And the dupe actually did damage to a lot of us. We were really thinking we were going to be living in our imaginations come 2012. It's not entirely untrue, but it was a hard oversell. But he approached some famous scientist with his early work, with his brother Dennis, on the holographic mind. And he said, I just want to know if these ideas are fallacious. And the guy looked it over and said, this isn't even fallacious. And Terence took a pretty, staunch anti-science stance from that point on, which to an extent is kind of understandable, because part of the reason that we're locked into this restrictive, oppressive, limited, sort of narrow bandwidth of experiential, the negative bandwidth, narrow bandwidth of experience, the perceptual limitations that have been imposed on us by the modern materialistic worldview. The scientists, as the high priests, do kind of dictate to people what their reality is allowed to be. And people really play along with that, There's pretty solid logic that we can use to kind of fight back against that. But, he wasn't wrong that scientists, have a very well-defined ontology that probably does not represent a holistic perspective of the universe. Certain things are ruled out a priori, and that's not science. That's religion. But on the other hand, really good metaphysics, really good occult ideas will stand up to scientific scrutiny. They at least can't be disproven, and they should be consistent with, or they should survive, scientific scrutiny. That's what the mystery schools of ancient Egypt and today really are actually about. Finding this unification between reason and the almost inexpressible, the esoteric, the exoteric and esoteric, doing a little dance. Oh, Bruno was asking about the speeding up of time. Yeah. So, what Terence lied about was he claimed that he had proven mathematically that there was a novelty wave. He called it time wave zero. And honestly, it's been so many years, and it was so densely technical. I don't remember exactly all the details, but it was basically this idea that there was an omega point. So anything that cycles has like an absolute maximum speed, just like the speed of light. The properties of light, the behaviors of light, that is a source, that is the fountain of tremendous mystical secrets and insights, by the way, while we're on the subject. But if it's true of light, it's going to be true of everything else, because there were only two things in the universe, light and void. So if it's true of light, it's true of everything. And you can extract a lot from that. I'll give you an example, actually. You might say, but Illuminostic, you're talking like an Illumidumbass. It's obviously matter is not massless. You sure about that? Because as far as I'm, I can't check this myself. My eyeballs don't happen to have electron microscopes built into them. But I have seen the results from particle acceleration chambers, and I'm fairly confident that these experiments actually happened, because there's, one of the main disqualifier for flat Earth is that there would be too many conspirators required. It's just too grand, the scale of the conspiracy. In fact, so much so that if you believe it, you're actually a moron. Not even sorry if any of you guys are flat earthers out there, but it really is that dumb, and worse, really. But you know what I mean? I can't test this myself, but seems to be a consensus that matter is like 99% empty space. So, in the same way that photons are emitted by something that is at least physical enough to wave, to do something, but then somehow also not physical, just like matter. Because why? Matter is light in a standing wave. You know what I mean? So yeah, it's even true of matter, that whatever's true of light is true of matter. The caveat, I guess, is that, Keter is in Malkut, Malkut is in Keter, but after another fashion. Or heaven is in the earth, and earth is in heaven, but after another fashion, or something. That was like the Christian and the Kabbalistic way of saying the same thing. But what was I saying about light and Terence's numbers and whatnot? So anyways, he had this, a mega point, right? So the speed of light, that's what it is. The maximum speed in the universe is the speed of light, the cosmic constant. And so anything that cycles has a maximum velocity that it cannot exceed, right? So theoretically, music would have like an absolute high note that would probably be a solid object. You would reach the pitch and it would like turn into a little ball of photons, or metal, or gold. Probably it would turn to gold and drop out of the drop out of the air. But you know what I mean? There's going to be a maximum, an omega point for anything. So, there was some kind of logic there that stands up. So the idea is that novelty was the idea concressing force in the universe, that over time there are these ebbs and flows. There is an ebb and flow of novelty, just like there is anything else. And that's why we have these peaks and dips in human history, where they're sort of like non-productive periods like the 1980s that cower and are abased before me, Iwas says in the Book of the Law. I thought that was hilarious. Because, the 80s are like the most empty, vapid, cocaine-fueled, stupid hairspray, hairstyles, plastic. Like, in the Book of the Law, it says the 80s are abased and cower before me. That's real precognition right there. But yeah, so, the 1980s weren't very novel. The 1960s were extremely novel, that kind of thing. And so in 2012, this novelty hit an omega point. And so what Terence theorized, and this is also where the New Agers get the idea of the fifth dimension and like your imagination instantly manifesting, that we would reach this omega point in novelty, and that human creativity would be instantaneous. And so whatever you thought would just happen. And so, this is kind of like heaven. The idea is that if you have hate and evil and greed and fear in your being, because whatever you're thinking and feeling manifests instantly, you would be quite a hazard to yourself and everyone around you if you are harboring those kind of feelings. And so, this is like the commonality. This is the function of the prohibitions on evil people in places like heaven and the fifth dimension in Terence McKenna's version of 2012. But it turns out there were a string of numbers that he reversed deliberately in order to make the mathematics work. He knew that the equations were bunk, and he published them in a book and went around doing speaking tours claiming that he believed all this shit, and he knew he was lying the entire time. That's just fucked up to realize. It's a powerful and important lesson, because we need to be realistic about psychedelics as well, and obviously they don't just completely cure a person of neurosis and ego and all of this kind of narcissism and whatnot. In fact, they can exacerbate those things pretty tremendously. So a lot of lessons there. At the same time, of course, I'm infinitely grateful for Terence McKenna. He was extremely kind to me when I was like 17 years old. And he was the first person I ever exchanged an email with in my entire life. The first person I sent one to and the first person I received one from was Terence McKenna in 1997. So, not all bad, but definitely determined to make himself a prophet, even if it meant lying to all of his fans. Yeah, I mean, of course we can use music to create matter. That's what matter is, really, That's the basic idea behind string theory, is that, vibrating strings give rise to physical particles. And in a sense, that's sort of what music is. Although, interestingly, it's almost like it's the nothingness between the somethingness. There's that Tool song where he says, I open up to suck it in. I feel it move across my skin. Moving up and moving down. I lose myself between the sounds. Because, it's really moving air. And it's definitely occurred to me that what we're actually hearing is the space that is opened up when the ether is removed, that the music is what's actually there, and that these particles, this air, is just in the way, muting what Pythagoras called the music of the spheres. In fact, it's claimed that the old Sanskrit masters, no one really knows how to speak Sanskrit exactly. But it's claimed that the old Sanskrit masters could speak an apple into existence, or, whatever, that was the real power of Sanskrit. And, I'm sure you guys have seen those metal plates where their vibrations are used to make patterns emerge from sand. It's pretty remarkable. You've probably also seen that ice crystal experiment that was completely fake by that fake Japanese scientist. Since we've been on the theme tonight of people just completely scamming people in the spiritual community or whatever, yeah, that wasn't real. There was nothing real about that. The guy took pictures of snowflakes and then told a really dumb story that, just doesn't even make any sense and never happens. That's the truth about that. It really blew my mind also that Fox actually was the studio that put out that movie, What the Bleep. And I guarantee you, every single person coming out of that theater, if you'd said, should you trust Fox? They all would have said no. But then if you said, well, so you believe the thing about the ice crystals and the Japanese scientists? Oh, yeah, absolutely. What? By the way, you guys, this is supposed to be an AMA to some extent. Man, it's late, 12:30. Look at me, up so late. And I'm not trying to pick on people here. I'm just trying to walk my talk, which is that science and spirit can actually do a little dance, and that when you're successful at that, it actually bears fruit. Your success will be your proof. Is one of the most important things that I've ever heard in my life. It's what Iwas told Aleister Crowley in the Book of the Law: your success will be your proof. That is tremendously important, because what we see when we look out into the realm of social media and people that are spiritual, allegedly, it generally tends to be a whole lot of new agey ideas that are demonstrably false. And people are really capable of believing things just because they want to, even though they're proven wrong almost every moment of every day. And I really believe that the pursuit of truth and gnosis and illumination and even enlightenment is genuinely important. That, when we look out at the world at large, at the mainstream media and the mainstream culture in places like particularly the United States, China as well, the suppression of, states of mind like flow state, and the suppression of psychedelic drugs, and the ubiquitous presence of vapid, empty, stupid music. I mean, I've mentioned this a couple times on the stream in the last few weeks, but some Ivy League school was having their writing graduates, I don't remember exactly, English, whatever, do their thesis on Taylor Swift, her lyrics, The reason for that is that the liberation, the amelioration of mankind from the specter, from the, shadow of history and slavery, the great revolution of the ages that has begun its march has for its aim the amelioration of mankind from superstition and despotism and slavery and all sorts of evils. And the pursuit of this kind of consciousness is the antidote to the atom bomb and is the antidote to all of those other evils that I just mentioned. And, people unnecessarily sort of profaning the mysteries is not helping us. Yeah, well, he's saying how much can they phase you? They blindsided me. I mean, I used to get 10,000 views in a month on a video, and now it's like 100 or 200 because of the and something I said about that on Facebook got me shadow banned across all social media. So it was very, very easy for them to target people that were coming up and make sure they didn't. So they've done a fair job of suppressing. I mean, who knows? But I think it's fair to assume that if that hadn't happened, I probably would have a much larger platform by now. And if that was the case, I would actually also have more resources. And if I have resources, then I can put those resources to work and actually, you know what I mean? Like, they've definitely neutered a lot of us very effectively. As I was saying earlier in the stream, I mean, you're right that as long as we are consciously evolving ourselves and pursuing, liberation from our traumas and higher self-understanding and greater levels of consciousness and cognitive liberty and adepthood, we are progressing the entire race. It's true, and that is really what the adepts and magicians have always been there for. I heard Jerry Garcia once say, our real mission is just to see if we can help the human race to take a few steps ahead. And Aleister Crowley said that the real job of the magician is to toe the line of human consciousness and extend the high watermark. Yeah, and because we're all connected, and we this is one of those places where science and spirituality have in fact dovetailed. Entrainment tells us that we are connected to the farthest reaches of the other end of the galaxy. I mean, even where the edge of the universe is expanding faster than light, we are instantaneously connected to, we can communicate to that distance instantly. There are no known limits to entrainment. Is it? No, not entrainment. Entanglement, excuse me. Entrainment is also important, but entanglement, proves the Buddha's words, 2,000 years ago. And I don't know how many Native American cultures have some way of expressing, that everything is fundamentally connected. But that is one of those mystical truths that turned out to be far more true than I think anyone would have really imagined until science once again discovered some old scrap of magical wisdom and made a great fuss about its cleverness, as it is wont to do. By the way, you guys, do hit the like button, share, subscribe, support me on Patreon. That's very helpful. Secret streams, I do them, and there's like 4 years of material that is not available to the public. Weekly, at least, 4 years of that. Masonic degrees, and all sorts of stuff that I would not share with the outer order. Yeah, and then there's also options to support me in the chat way up at the top. PayPal and Zelle and whatnot. We're demonetized, so if you guys don't support me, I don't get paid. And I hate that. I hate it. Really hate it. I hate to do anything for free. I mean, I don't really hate to do anything for free, but that's the thing, The other part of it, aside from entanglement, is entrainment. We know that everything that cycles is compelled to entrain with higher cycle. And anything that cycles does this. So electrical lines, clocks, human heartbeats, everything. And this is, the reason why the magician is confident that he can constrain the demon to his service, because it is compelled by God. That's what's really meant by this. Any good magician knows that it's not actually God. It's the laws of the universe. That's what God is, the laws of the universe, compelled by God to be constrained to his service, really means that the magician knows that he can use the law of entrainment to constrain some force to his purposes. And what that means in a practical sense is that you can turn lust to your advantage by making it a creative impulse. You can use greed to your advantage without, to really constrain these forces and compel them to work for the light. Means that you would turn greed into a sort of healthy ambition, and even gluttony, if you compensate. This is the law of compensation that is so important. If you compensate by increasing your exercise, if you're going to eat this, I bought a kilo of jungle deer jerky for the equivalent of $5 American today. I was pretty stoked about that. A big old chunk of deer steak, fresh deer steak, for $5 too. A kilo of it. Kilo of deer for $5. So, if I'm going to eat a big pile of that, then I got to do extra push-ups. So, with wisdom, we can constrain all of these lower forces to higher purposes. Speaking of porpoises, I just found out that they use the pink dolphins in the river around here to catch catfish, which makes me sad. You shouldn't kill dolphins to use them as bait. Can you imagine? I guess they don't taste good. No one eats them. So they constrain the porpoises to do their will and catch them, catfish, because they taste better. And they like to eat dolphins, I guess. Demons are a thing, he asks. No, not really. Demons are thought forms. They are projections of the human psyche. Aleister Crowley, who I consider to be the greatest occultist I'm aware of. I mean, I've never seen anything like it. He said that the Goetia, the demons of the Goetia, whatever the hell, however the hell you say it, are parts of the human subconscious towards the end of his life. So after all those years of, plummeting to the depths of the subconscious mind with sex, magic, and drugs and rituals and all this stuff, he ultimately came to the conclusion that these were just parts of the human mind. And he was actually given the 43rd most important Briton in history by the Crown for mapping hitherto unknown regions of the human mind. Not for summoning demons, It's unfortunate to me, I think people seem to get disappointed by the idea that there are no angels and no demons and no spirits and really no God. I think people are really hoping that spirituality is going to mean that there is this fairy tale that they can escape into at some point, that the real world is going to dissipate and there's going to be all this goofy woo there to amuse and for their edification and amusement. And, I'm not saying the universe isn't teeming with intelligence of some kind, but, not even Aleister Crowley believed in the literal existence of spirits and demons. We have to entertain ourselves somehow, and a lot of that stuff was theatrics and art. It's art. It's aesthetic. It's pleasure. It's personal expression. But you know, there really aren't a lot of really truly genius level people out there that actually believe in that kind of stuff. They don't exist as far as I can tell. Never have I found one ever. You know, it seems like once you kind of develop to a certain point, you kind of just know better. It's just silly. You know, if there were really evil demons crawling around all over the earth, we'd all be gone by now. Invisible enemies brimming with evil and shit. I mean, come on. What are people thinking? We would have all been picked off a long time ago. You know, what is staying their hand? God, the forces of God. It's a fucking joke, man. I think there are forces, for sure. Gravity, electricity. You know what I mean? One thing that I'm curious about, though, is the idea of the higher self. Like, sometimes that does strike me as a disembodied, you know, entity of some kind, something separate, that definitely knows way more than I possibly could. But then again, you have to admit, when considering things like this, that the possibility of the mind, subconscious mind, interpreting patterns and extending them in all sorts of directions can explain all sorts of, you know, apparent reception of, you know, unknowable knowledge. So, I don't know. The older I get and the more that I interact with this stuff, the less I'm inclined to the woo, which is kind of interesting to me, you know. When I first started drinking ayahuasca, for example, I was much more convinced of the objective existence of DMT entities than I am now, you know. Just didn't really stand up to scrutiny over time, you know. And people would say, didn't you receive information that turned out to be true that you couldn't possibly know? Sure, but that doesn't mean those entities were real. It really doesn't. It just means that I got information from some sort of, you know, reservoir, or it was coincidence or whatever, but it doesn't mean that the DMT entities are actually real, you know. I mean, I guess they could be in some sense, but I think that the theory that I'm leaning towards at this point regarding all that is that there is a field of consciousness that represents a sort of baseline awareness, and we have a bunch of magnetite in our heads that gives coherence to that field when there is an intersection of vectors. And so it's like that intelligence does permeate everything. But I think it is in a low state of coherence until we interface with it. And when we take psychedelics, the access or the frequency is greater. So there's sort of a wider range of experience, and our pineal gland, probably like when you close your eyes and you can still kind of see little vague colors, and you know, you can kind of, I can picture like a unicorn right now. I'm picturing, and it just turned green a little bit. And, you know, that kind of stuff is just amplified exponentially, you know. And there's also mechanisms in the brain that cause us to see faces in gibberish. So that is, pretty solid explanation for why people see DMT entities. I have a feeling that was probably a disappointing rant for a lot of our audience, but I'm tired of the woo. I really am. I've had enough. We need to make real progress, and we need to be serious, and take responsibility for our ideas and what we put out in the world. And, I just want to do a better job at the things that I do. And the more time goes by, the more I see muddle-headed mystics as the rule out there in the world, and actual adepts working on this stuff in a productive way are like unicorns almost, Very confused people out there. I know a girl right now that almost every day she posts about how New Age religion is, an evil instrument of colonialism, and then every other post that she makes is straight out of the New Age playbook. The propaganda machine, I feel, is responsible for this, and they have got people confused bad, really bad. Yeah, someone's asking if I can recommend Aleister Crowley, Magick in Theory and Practice, Magick Book 4. It's not really the entirety of these books, though, mostly just the beginning, like the introduction, and then, the rest of it's kind of whatever. And then the Book of Lies, so falsely called, but it's a project, you have to know your Kabbalistic terms, you have to know... the four worlds of the soul of the Hebrew mystical system. You just have to take the time to look up all the terms that you're not familiar with and learn them. Otherwise, you won't understand the book. But the Book of Lies probably is the most important esoteric document that's ever been composed. Essential reading, I would say that, and Gems from the Equinox has some good stuff in there. His Book of Thoth, not just the tarot deck, but the actual book about the tarot deck, has some pretty important stuff. And then Morals and Dogma by Albert Pike also, I think, is something that anyone that's interested in the mysteries should absolutely read. But it's almost 1 a.m. here, and I need to get some sleep. So thank you guys so much for spending this time with me. Please hit the like button, share, subscribe, support me on Patreon or one of the options in the chat, and I will see you guys again very soon. Keep your eyes out for the Bora videos. I'm going to put them out in little pieces, so they'll be like the Bora dance and the Bora drums, and then the whole video all at once. And, the re-engineered live streams also. So, thank you guys, and good night.